Well, welcome to another installment, we'll say, of the Fireside Adoptees Adoptee Fire Speaker Series. We have a great interview for you today with Michelle Rice-Gauvreau, who is a native Mohawk woman. She was born in Canada and raised in Connecticut. And part of her story is around an illegal adoption, which unfortunately was commonplace for many Indian babies throughout many years across North America. So we'll be interested to hear more about that. She's a compassionate advocate for all adoptees looking for their own truth, peace, and hope. She hopes to instill her strength to any adoptee struggling to find their way. Michelle now works as a legal professional for a prestigious law firm. She resides in Connecticut with her husband of many years and her two senior cats. She enjoys traveling, learning more about Native cultures far and wide. She's also an author, so we'll be hoping to speak a little bit about her book. Michelle, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, Greg, thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody who's joining us.
Really exciting.
It
I've
is.
I've been honored to have the chance to meet you in person, which was great. We spent some time together in New York at this event recently, Operation Fog Lift, which was a great success. And we're always excited for the word on adoptee issues to be elevated.
Hmm.
And it was great to have that connection with you. And we've been talking a little bit about things going on with you. I know you're a couple of states away from me, and so I'm very interested when we can spend more time together talking about your story. This is a great opportunity, though, to learn more about you for the benefit of everybody who's here today and also who will be listening and watching on YouTube. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, just starting about uh, your adoption experience in the sense of, we know you were obviously relinquished in Canada, as we read a little bit in the introduction here to your bio, but could you talk a little bit about what you know about the circumstances of why you were relinquished?
Absolutely. I was born, I was nearly born in a car. um, I was a little bit early when I was born, but my birth mother got me to the hospital, and she had told her hospital roommate at the time that her mother was forcing her to give me up, and she did not want to give me up. And it was very heartbreaking for her, but she didn't have a choice. My grandmother had already been raising my older brother, and she did not have the finances to take home another baby, and nobody else was available really in the family to take me. So my birth mother's hospital roommate knew of a family, but they were here in Connecticut. She knew of another man. His name was Tom. He was also Mohawk from the same reservation, but lived in Connecticut for iron work. He was working back and forth between Hartford and New York City. At the time, he was working on the World Trade Center, and he was also working on a couple of buildings here in Connecticut. Um, so when he got the call to learn that I was available, he was gung ho, and he said, "We'll be right there." It was only him that came up. The woman that he married stayed behind to supposedly get the nursery ready. So he came up, and he made an agreement with Sharon, my birth mother, that yes, he would adopt me. Yes, he would give me a good life. Yes, I would want for nothing. So then he immediately went to membership services on the reservation to have me put on the rolls as his daughter, um, which was all great and dandy. But then he goes to the church, and he had a birth baptismal certificate from Canada, from Ganawagi, which is the reservation, to state that I was born in Manchester Hospital, Vernon, Connecticut. You would have thought that might have raised a few red flags.
Wow. Yes.
That was the only birth certificate I had. So, how I was able to get through school, how I was able to get a driver's license, I'll never know. The angels were probably on my side. Um, so he made all of the arrangements, and he again assured Sharon that I would have a good life. And he took me off to Connecticut. Just a little bit before I turned 3, he passed away suddenly. He was diagnosed with stage 4 carcinoma of the lungs, and he died like just suddenly. And I was left with a white mother. To She didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
She moved into another house. She became a hoarder. I went to a Catholic school that I think they had questions about me, but whatever, you know. Um, my mother had no running water. Um, there were holes in the walls, from what I remember. We had no refrigerator, no stove. She usually cooked on a hot plate, and she would keep food in a styrofoam cooler. She and I did not get along very well. She became rather abusive towards me, physically, emotionally. And she used to own apartments, and she had a tenant that loved to brag about beating his children. And he kept saying to her, "You beat her 1 or 2 times, she'll behave." Nope, that didn't help. He gave her a belt and told her to use the buckle side, and told her I would certainly behave after that. Now that made me more angry, or I was becoming an angry teenager, and this was before I found out I was adopted. I was probably 12 or 13 at the time. And then a couple of years later, go on, my mother's asking relatives in the family to take me, and she just didn't know how to handle me. She would go to school meetings for me, and she would just fall asleep during the school meetings. Yeah, so things like that. So finally, one of my uncles said, "Okay, we'll take her, we'll help you out." And I went to go live with them. I slept on a cot just like I did at home in their living room. And finally, his wife, I think it was his second wife, my Aunt Rita, took me out to dinner and told me the truth about I was adopted. The entire truth came out. My adoptive mother did not know what to do after that. She was blown away when I confronted her with the truth. And again, it is in my book. My book is called Who Am I? And I'm just giving you little snippets here and there. And so after I found out I was adopted, I'm 15. I was determined. I was hellbound to go up to Canada and find my birth family. Come to find out, Leah, my adoptive mother, knew who my birth mother was, and also knew that I had a brother. So to grow up without an older brother really bothered me. I grew up an only child, but come to find out, during the years of my adulthood, I found out I have 5 other brothers and sisters with all my parents. But as I go back, I took a 9-hour bus ride at 15 up to Montreal. My birth family welcomed me with open arms. It was an amazing place to see Montreal, and then go on to the reservation, which was absolutely beautiful. I finally walked into my grandmother's house, and wow, this is what a clean house looks like, and you could take a shower. Just things like that. And I really didn't want to leave. I stayed for the whole summer. And let me tell you, it was a culture shock, because I grew up in what we call white society. Now I'm on this one area on a reservation with my people, and I don't know anything. I don't know the traditions. I didn't know the culture. If my father had lived, I would have probably known everybody, and I would have known the culture. But Leah kept me secluded. I don't think Leah liked me going to Canada, but she didn't have a choice. And I really, really felt I needed to meet my birth family, and I did. And I was welcomed back with open arms, but I had to go back at the end of the summer. I was crazy enough. I was missing home. I was missing some of my friends, and I was missing what I thought I had at home. Come to find out, the night I went back, Leah wanted me out, and she put me in foster care the next day.
Oh my goodness.
So it was very rough, and the first foster home I was in was not a good one. They were mainly in it for the money, and they didn't care where we were, as long as we were home by 11 o'clock, I think it was, or 10 o'clock. I don't know. The doors weren't locked at that point. So anyway, I got out of there. My social workers moved me into a group home, which they felt I needed a lot of structure. And at the time, I didn't want structure. I was rebuffing it everywhere. I appreciate it now. I really do. I learned a lot of structure there, as much as I was against it at the time. But I was moved around a lot. I did go back to Canada once or twice during my teen years. My grandmother passed away, so I definitely went up there for the funeral, which my grandmother was the one who forced my mother to give me up. And on her deathbed, she asked me if I forgave her. And I think I was 18 at the time. And I said, "Grandma, there's nothing to forgive. Well, you didn't know, you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know, it wasn't your fault. You were only doing the best that you could." And she felt so regretful that she separated my brother and I. And then she passed away, which was sad, but you know, it, it, it made me a little tougher, I guess. And I still have, in going through the years, I've met my husband, had a son, and I hadn't dealt with all of the pain that I had dealt with as a teenager and with my adoptive mother. I still hadn't dealt with it. I hadn't really let it just sink in. I grew a big, thick skin, which is going to bring me forward a little bit. In 2019, I became very sick, and I said, I got to write it. I got to write something for my son, like a diary or something about my life, because he really didn't know what I had gone through. Growing up with an adoptive mother who just didn't know what to do, just didn't know how to handle me. And back then in the 60s and 70s, you didn't talk about mental health. It was always the kid's fault. You know, it was always my fault. She was pointing fingers at me. The Catholic school did the same thing. It's always her fault, you know. So you didn't talk about that then. It was, you know, fingers were pointed at me. So,
Right.
So when I was sick in 2019, I said, I've got to write this. So I started writing my book called Who Am I? And I think that was cathartic, and it was a big closure for me. I'm still seeping blood from those wounds a little bit because I had to relive quite a bit. It wasn't easy, but I needed to get my story out there to let other people know that, hey, no matter what you've been through in adoption, you're not alone. You're not alone because you lost your birth parents. You have other people who have been there, you know. It was tough. And I'm going to go back here a little bit. I did meet my birth father as well. I only met him for one weekend, and that was it. That was the last time I ever saw him. I always wanted to see the man who made me, and I did get that. I didn't get anything else. I do know I have two sisters with him, but they don't want to have a relationship, which is fine. Well, it's not really fine, but you know. So when my adoptive mother passed away in 2006, when I got married and I became an adult and more responsible and whatnot, the adoptive family really didn't pay too much attention to my mother, and I was estranged from her for a long time, for many, many years, estranged. I got a call from the police department saying that my mother had been going down there trying to get me in trouble, that I was coming to her house and breaking in. I live 45 minutes away from her. There was no way I could have been doing that. And the police understood that, and they knew that. The state of Connecticut got social services involved. And then they asked me to become her conservator because nobody else would step up to help her. So I did. I felt responsibility to take care of her. And because nobody else would. And so I was there, and I was there a lot to see how she was and whatnot. A couple of times I had some things thrown at me in the nursing home. That wasn't easy for me. That wasn't easy to see her in a bed, not being able to move, not being able to articulate her words. At the end, I told her I loved her, and I whispered to her, "Mom, do you love me?" The best she could come up with was, she whispered back, "I guess." And then she slid into her coma, and she died a day later.
Oh my gosh, Michelle.
I'm gonna cry.
Okay.
I took it as kind of a blanket over me, saying that was the best she could do, you know. My birth mother, Sharon, however, she came down a week later, and she could do nothing but hug me. You know, she was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." It's not your fault. You know, I don't blame Sharon at all. I don't, because she was 20. She was young. She was naive. She already had a son that she wasn't taking care of. So how could she take care of me too? But we have a good friendship. You know, we have been estranged over the years here and there. There has been some birth family drama. I'm like, oh, pull back. That's what I do. I pull back. But I do have the support of my birth family. I have my aunts who are in touch with me daily. And I'm grateful for that. So having my birth family be as supportive as they have been with me writing the book, and they didn't know all that I had gone through. They've been like a godsend in the last few years. They didn't know. So I take that as a gift. I take that as a gift. And what I'm doing today is I'm just taking it day by day. And I needed, for me to write that book and to know that others out there may be dealing with maybe some of the same circumstances, they're not alone. I'm here. We're all here together. And when I went to Operation Fog Lift, I knew we were all in this together for a reason.
Yes.
And I'm also working on a second book too, and it's called The Healing After.
Wow.
So and it's going to be more of I'm learning about my tradition, the Mohawk traditions and the culture. So it's going to be more of surrounding that, how I heal around that, because I feel that is my calling. And yeah. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, actually. Not surprising. Well, thank you. First of all,
I'm grateful for the life that I have. I think I was taught many, many lessons. And one of them is sometimes I had a path to choose. I chose love. I chose to take my pain and put it into love and power instead of going angry and down a wrong path. Because there's two ways to look at that. You know, it made me grow up.
I ask you, first of all, thank you again so much for sharing that so vulnerably, because there's a lot of pain in there.
There is. Oh, excuse me. My shades are open. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I go through the same thing. Yeah. So may I ask, so you didn't find out until well into your life that you were adopted?
I was 15 at the time and going through hell at the time. And to find out from somebody else other than my own adoptive mother, that was tough. That was tough. And I'll tell you a little something. My mother, my adoptive mother, basically wanted me to hate Rita for that. And I didn't. I was supposed to be angry at her for the rest of my life, but in the end, I wasn't. I was kind of thankful because she did tell me the truth.
Yeah.
I may have been angry at first because I'd be like, what? My adoptive mother didn't want me. She puts me with relatives, and then all of a sudden I come back from Canada and now I'm going into foster care. What gives? You know, Rita, I think, saved me in a way, telling me the truth and then coming home to a birth family that had nothing but open arms for me. You know, so I think on some level, my adoptive mother was very jealous because her husband died. She became secluded, became a hermit, a hoarder, and did not want me out there. When I was cleaning out her house, I found so many cards, so many letters from family, from Tom, my adoptive father's family, to Leah saying, hey, we'll help you take care of her if you want to send her up here for a summer, or we'll just come down and help you. You know, please let us know. We're always here. Yeah. She cut off every contact she could find regarding his family. She did not want me out there at all. You know, she was trying to hide me, but yet she didn't want me, or she didn't know how to take care of me.
It sounds
so
like.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
For sure.
That's a big thing. And then going into foster care, well, you know, and then you're being bounced around from home to home to home. It's like, okay. But I did find I was lucky, and I do mention this in my book. I was very lucky. I did have foster parents, Jeff and Elaine, who they were from England. They loved everything about Native Americans, but they also were co-founders of the Connecticut River Powwow Society, and they brought me into it. So I was able to meet so many people from around the country and around North America that I kind of started feeling whole again, you know, meeting other natives and learning their traditions. And I still have a lot to learn, but it's absolutely, it feels like home when you go to one of the reservations. It feels like home to me.
Mm-hmm. So they obviously had all this information about your birth family. And
Leah did, yes.
Yeah. And was that suddenly just available for you after you found out?
So,
Find your birth family so easily.
so what happened was, yes, Leah knew about who my birth mother was. She did not know who my birth father was. She also knew I had a brother. But why she kept that from me, I don't know. She just did. I guess she just didn't want to lose me on some level.
Mm.
Um, the day I confronted her, she pulled out a letter from my brother. My brother had just written her a letter about a month before that. He just found out about me.
Wow.
And I think that might have been part of the reason she did not want me in the house anymore, because I think she was afraid I was going to find it, or I was going to go through things. And it was just a wild time. And so all of a sudden, Rita didn't want me there at her house anymore. I think she and my mother had words. And I went back to Leah's house. I shouldn't have, but I did. It was just very unhealthy. I kept begging Leah. I said, I want to meet my family. I want to meet my birth family. No, you're too young. You can go when you're 18. I don't want to hear any more about this. And I'm like, not happening. Not happening. Because I was really looking for somebody to save me. And I was like, no, I got to meet her. I need to know why I was giving up. Finally, she relented. So I called Canada 411. I was given a telephone number, which turned out to be the wrong number, but that person knew my family.
Wow.
Gave me the right number. I called. I had a cousin who picked up the phone, put me in, kind of muffled the phone, and all of a sudden I hear this woman screaming in the background. What?
Oh.
This woman gets on the phone. She says, who is this? I said, my name's Michelle. I said, I think I'm Sharon's daughter. I'm your grandmother. So it was my grandmother who answered the phone. And Sharon called me the next night for sure. And we had like a 2-hour long talk. I'm sure that phone bill was high. And after that, we just talked. So a couple weeks later, I asked if I could come up. Leah, again, was not going to let me go anywhere, but I kind of forced the situation. I really, really wanted to just go. And at 15, I took a 9-hour bus ride up to Montreal and, took a 9-hour ride back too. But I did write about all of that in the book, the sights, the smells, everything, the sounds. And to a 15-year-old, maybe I could have waited a little while longer, but I was desperate. And I think the foster homes were a good idea today. Back then, not so much. But I got what I needed. And it, kind of catapulted me into where I am today. I have a thick skin. And I have a heart for every other adoptee here. And my story's not over yet. And that's why I'm writing a second book about my healing.
So you've made the connection. You had time with them, came back. Obviously, your life was plunged into more chaos at the time.
It was.
With
was.
that kind of rejection. And then, did you find that? Well, let me ask you this. Actually, you've mentioned the white family, right?
Where were they?
Well, how did you sense any difference between yourself and your mother, your adoptive mother? Did you ever think, yeah, I seem to stand out in a certain way, or did you think maybe that's my father is dead now? And
so my adoptive mother, in her ways to try to, I don't know, tell me that I was meant for the family, she said that I picked her when I was born. And I was like, okay. She told me I look like a couple of cousins in the family. So I remember when I was younger, I used to get teased a bit. And actually, I think I was 9 at the time, and I asked her, and I think every kid asks, am I adopted? And she would say no. She would vehemently lie about it. No. You look like your cousin Jenny. You look like a lot of people in this family. So no, you are not adopted. Okay. All right, Mom. So after I found out I was adopted, I didn't really see much of the family. I saw a favorite aunt of mine every once in a while. I did see Rita once or twice after that, but I wasn't allowed to talk to her.
Yeah.
Even during my adult years, Leah had her hand over me in some way, some fashion or some way, because I was never allowed to talk about her business or her or anything. She had just become so inside herself. She was just a recluse and just an introvert. But then on the other hand, she didn't care what I did, you know. What was I going to say? I had not seen many of the family after I came back from Canada for years, years and years, until my mother became sick, and the state had asked me to step in to become her conservator. Nobody stepped up. Nobody came around. She had a brother who would come and visit her every once in a while, but he's in his 80s. He could barely drive. And unfortunately, he was kind of believing her telling him that I was breaking in and doing things that I wasn't doing. So the last time I saw him was at my mother's burial, and he just walked away from me. He didn't say a word, but I did catch up to him and say, you know what? I didn't do those things my mother told you I did. And by the way, I loved her. And that was pretty much the last words I ever had with him. I think he believed me after that. But at the burial of my adoptive mother, I had seen cousins that I hadn't seen in 25 years just come out of the woodwork. And I was like, excuse my language, where the F were you all?
Yeah. Right.
That's exactly how I felt. Oh, they all waved to me. They all hugged me. Oh, we love you. We're so sorry about Aunt Leah. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Who are you people?
Right.
I'm like, what? So for about a year afterwards, I had a cousin who said, oh, come on over. We're going to have a family get together and do stuff. I wasn't so comfortable, but I did go to a couple of family gatherings. And afterwards, I realized, no, I do not fit in. And that was pretty much it. I have not seen my cousins since maybe 2008. I haven't seen anybody. And I'm okay with that. They all know I wrote a book. They all know I put my truth out there. I haven't heard a word. And that's okay. And I think they know, though. I think they know. I've seen more and heard more from my birth family than ever. And that's a blessing. That really is a blessing. So that's the Cliff's Notes of my book.
I want to take the opportunity to ask you some questions about the indigenous piece here.
Please.
So important, and the practices in Canada around adoption of Native children, because you mentioned a little bit here how this happened, but is it common for Native children in Canada to end up in the US?
So I'm going to say yes and no to that right now. Back in the 60s, there was called the baby scoop era. I believe, and I'm pretty sure this would have happened if I had not been adopted the way I was. I'm pretty sure I would have ended up in a Catholic orphanage or a residential school. That if anybody has heard about the residential school horrific findings up there in Canada, all of the babies and children that have been found in unmarked graves. I do believe that I probably would have been sent to one of those schools if I weren't adopted. I think I traded one evil for another. And there were a lot of Native adoptees that ended up in the US. I know that. I don't know how many. There's a woman that I have been speaking to in Massachusetts that she's a writer about Indian adoptions. And she was also the editor of Pequot Times down here in Foxwoods. So she's a blessing too to me. She wants to find Native adoptees to come forward. And I'm going to say there was probably millions. There was probably millions of adoptions, or millions, or so many illegal adoptions. You know, names were changed, places of birth were changed. You know, the language was taken away, you know, things like that. Culture, you know, a lot of us have lost our culture and we want it back. You know, I'm 100% want my culture back, and I want to learn more. And, you know, I was talking to my family. I had met up with them in New York, like back in October. And I asked them, I said, so tell me about the culture. What do we do? You know, many of them just don't know. They don't know anymore because it wasn't passed down.
Wow.
a lot of the stuff was not passed down. So there are a lot, I think there were a lot of Native babies that also went into foster care in Canada and in the US. Again, names changed, places of birth changed. Very sad situation. And I don't know if anybody has seen I'm sorry about my shades. I don't know if anybody has seen the show on PBS called Little Bird.
Have not, but certainly interested in.
Take a look at that, and it is about a family. Their 4 children were taken away from them from Native parents because they didn't have a fit home on a reservation. So they were put in residential schools. And one young lady was adopted by a Jewish family in Montreal, changed her name and changed her place of birth and date of birth. But she goes back and she finds her siblings and finds her mother. Wow. And it was very, very raw and very emotional. A lot of it resonated with me, for sure. When I met Sharon, she had tears, I had tears, and she couldn't stop crying. And she kept saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I looked at her, I said, I'm okay. And this is me talking at 15. You know, I don't think, I was angry at Leah more than I ever would have been at Sharon or my grandmother. They did it because of financial reasons and because they didn't have the room for another baby. I understood that. So if Tom had lived, I was told by my birth family that Tom had made promises that absolutely I would have known my birth family way earlier than I found out. And we would have been back and forth, obviously. And I probably would have known more of my culture and more traditions and whatnot. So basically how I get some of my culture back is I will go to powwows and I will go and dance in that circle around the drum. And I will go home every once in a while too and just, you know, cook with my family or whatever. And, you know, that's basically what we do. We cook, we stay up, we play darts. So, but it's been wonderful to get to know a lot of my cousins too.
Imagine the any of the connections that you can make to the culture, to the land, to your heritage must be
anything
really meaningful in any way.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of healing for me, learning that and writing about it and what I'm getting out of that, even in my old age.
Do you have any words about ICWA for adoptees here who might be listening? The Indian Child Welfare Act, right?
Yeah. I'm not a fan. A lot of things need to be changed there. We need to rectify those records. We need to get the children back with their families. Some of them may be with family members, but the rest of them who are not, they need to go back. They need to be with their family. I'm not a big fan. Not a big fan. And if I can help change that in some way, call me.
Appreciate very much your perspective on that, on something that's so deeply personal and connection. You must feel very strongly.
We're still back in the beginning, I think, anyway. We're still way back in the beginning. We need a lot of changes, for sure. And they're making changes in Canada. Let's make them here too.
Did the fact that things were changed in the documentation that you said the only piece that you had, did that create a lot of complications for your life in America?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it did. Well, I can't say it did for school. School took the documentation, no problem. DMV, they looked at me. Thank God I knew the person. Department of Motor Vehicle. I'm like, all right, go. So I got my license. But at the age of 42, Canada started requiring passports. Mind you, all I had was an Indian card that could get me back and forth through the border, with a little bit of scuffle getting back into the US every once in a while. Or they just required, you know, your driver's license or a birth certificate. And the birth certificate never was an issue going through the border until they needed passports. So I'm like, all right, what do I do? Wow. Again, there's a whole chapter dedicated to this part of it. I'm just gonna fast forward and, you know, spoiler alert. Okay, the US did everything right. I just wasn't I wasn't cooperating very much. I had to apply for a passport, and I said, all right, let me try to apply for a US passport, because on the birth baptismal certificate from Canada said I was born in Vernon, Connecticut. Let's just try it. Nope. They gave me a call. They said, this is fraudulent. And I'm like, how is it fraudulent? I explained the circumstances, and they said, no, you got to get this rectified. Do you have your adoption papers? And I'm like, there was no adoption. There were no
Right.
adoption papers signed. It was nothing but an oral agreement. So with that being said, I applied to Canada passport. They denied me as well with that same birth certificate that was from Canada. And they were like, we can't help you here. This says you were born in Connecticut. And I said, where am I going to go? I explained to this gentleman in Canada that, look, I was born in Canada, but I was put on the rolls as being born in Vernon, Connecticut, and brought down here. Well, they still couldn't help me. I was like, what do I do now? I thought I was going to have to hire an attorney. I did go see an attorney, but I knew it was going to cost me an arm and a leg too to get this all rectified. So I said, no, I'm just going to do it myself. So the next day after I'd gotten that call back from Canada passport, the gentleman spoke to his director about my circumstances, and he told me what I needed to do. I had to go and I had to get my birth records from the hospital on the day I was born. I had to get Sharon's birth records with her permission. I had to have her sign an affidavit.
Oh,
She was willing to do everything for me so I could come up and visit. So I did. I got those records. I wrote a long letter to the vital statistics in Canada. We call it État civil. And I was also told by the passport agency that don't be surprised, they will probably deny you. Great, thanks.
wow.
I said, all right, well, anything right now. So I wrote them a long letter. I had affidavits. I had all the birth records proving everything. I had asked, if this is approved, please leave my original parents on the birth certificate to avoid scrutiny, because I knew my birth father would never sign off on anything. So 2 weeks go by, I'm biting my nails. I'm like, oh, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. And finally I called them. I said, hi, I'm Michelle Rice-Gauvreau. I sent you a letter. I know you folks received it because I got a return thing. And we received it. You're approved. We're amending your birth certificate to say that you were born in Canada. I almost fell on the ground. I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, thank you. Hang up before they change their mind, right? So within about a week or two, I had my long form and short form birth certificate. Going from there, I had to get a green card at the age of 42.
Oh,
I was beside myself about that, but in the end, the US was right, So I went and I applied for the green card. I was interrogated. They asked me, why didn't I apply through my husband when I got married in 1991? I said, because I didn't know, and because I had been here since I was 8 days old.
yeah.
They kept going back and forth, and they said, we'll send you a letter for another appointment in 2 weeks. All right, whatever. So I get another letter. Well, they want long form birth certificates of my grandparents proving my lineage. They wanted to prove my blood quantum and whatnot. I'm like, oh God, here we go. I wasn't about to spend $400 or $500 more on paper that meant nothing to me except for the paperwork I had that proved who I was. And I even had a letter from the reservation stating that I was 50% or more Native American. That wasn't good enough for them. So I finally made an urgent online appointment. I went down to immigration in Hartford, and I'd seen this young lady who was already like the assistant to the lady that interviewed me a couple of weeks before, and she had been moved up. I explained my situation to her, and she said, my mother-in-law had a similar situation. Go sit down. I'm going to go talk to my supervisor. I must have been waiting for what felt like forever. I like reorganized my binder 3 times. I'm going, great. They're going to deport me today. I'm thinking all these cynical things in my head. I'm like, oh, God, this is how I get through life, with sarcasm and cynicism. So anyway, she calls me back up to the desk. Sorry. She calls me back. Oh, I'm blind. She calls me back up to the desk, and she said, Michelle, you're all set. You're going to have your green card in 2 weeks. I was like, what? I was so shocked. And I just felt like, I looked up and I said, thank you. And I ran out of there again. I was like, before they changed their minds, but I did have a green card within 2 years, and it was 2 weeks. And it worked out. I think I proved myself enough, and I fought for myself enough to say, hey, I may have been adopted. Here are the circumstances, and here is my proof. I'm not going to lie about this. I even, I had my mother signed another birth record affidavit for that situation. And it just all tended to work out. I just didn't have the money to keep spending on the paperwork they wanted.
Yeah.
So I feel very lucky in that regard. I got really lucky. So, so I have a Canadian passport and I have a green card. I'm good.
That it worked out for you.
And my son became an attorney, and he was like, Mom, are you going to become a U.S. citizen now? And I said, oh, you got to give me time on that one. But I am a permanent resident. So there's the long story.
Well, that's really, I was very interested in it, and I'd heard part of it from a snippet of another interview you had done, and I really had wanted to spend a little time asking you how the nightmare convoluted stories, I've heard some of them, but this is firsthand difficult. Yeah. You had to kind of pay just to be who you are.
To pay your dues, yeah. You can't, it's hard. It's hard. I don't feel like I have to pay my dues so much anymore, except when I go up to Canada and I have to come back to the US when they ask me where I've been, and I tell them, and then they start. I've had this happen a couple of times. They've torn my car apart.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm like, what do you think I'm doing? So whatever, you just let it go. I had to say, I remember it was Canadian Thanksgiving. I had gone up and spent a couple of days with my aunt, and we had cooked, and we had 30 people at the house, and I had food to go back with because I had my dinner. The guard just reached in and he took my food, and he said, you can't bring that across the border. I said, that's my dinner. Whatever. Anyway, so we just let him go,
Beautiful.
Yeah. They can get pretty stingy up there.
I'm glad that all of that worked out, because obviously that could have been
it did
really awful for you. I'm just sorry for all the generations to get there. And
but I'm here now, I'm good. And I think my story can go along to hopefully help many others, and I'm still learning myself. I really am. I'm still learning the healing part. And sometimes when I think about things back home, like back with Leah, my adoptive mother, my stomach does start to do one of those turns. It's like, oh, stop. It's over now. I've learned how to breathe very deep and meditate. And I listen to the drum music in my head from like a powwow, or I'll listen to flute music. Things like that helps me.
So when you found out at 15 about being adopted, was there any history of adoptees that you knew in your life growing up? Or when did you first meet adoptees? I had interactions with them.
I might have known about one in Catholic school, but I didn't know about myself. So I never asked her any questions, never really talked to her about it, because I didn't know. And who knew, right? Adoption at that time was just such a secret. I was a secret, huge secret. Right. Whereas today it's not so much anymore. So no, I really didn't know any other adoptees growing up until I started, actually more or less until I started listening to some other stories, like on social media, and more so now today that I've written my book. I have heard from so many people that it feels like it's so surreal in such a way that there are so many of us out there.
Yeah.
And, I'd love to create a huge powwow myself of all adoptees in the circle and say, come on, we're all in this together. And I think we're all on the same path of, trying to find who we are, really, because I didn't know who I was, but today I know who I am. I am Native American, and I am a strong woman who, will come out of anything. As long as I have that peace on my side. And I do have that. There are days I still go back. Sometimes I go back into the fog some days, wondering why my adoptive family didn't step up the way they should have. they didn't know either, so I can't, there's no blame. There's really no blame,
How has being in the community been supportive for you?
How is what? I'm
How has
sorry.
being in the adoptee community been supportive for you?
Oh, knowing that I'm not alone and knowing that I can share my own, sorry about that. um, knowing that I'm not alone and that, wow, there are so many other, stories out there that I would honestly love a collective of stories just to read and just to know that that's what it's brought to me, is knowing that we're not alone, you know. And honestly, as in Emma Stevens says, again, the fire is coming.
Yeah.
So that book is great.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
There's a groundswell.
So yeah, I just take one day at a time, really, and I have my family. My husband sometimes just looks at me, crosses his eyes, goes, okay. My son, we had a book club at work. I have a wonderful law firm that did a book club for me, and it went viral, I guess. And they were so supportive, and it was just amazing to have an employer become so supportive in diversity, and
Yes.
It was just amazing. So that's what gets me through, knowing that there's support out there for all of us. And even if you're alone and you haven't reached out to somebody, don't hesitate. That's what I think. I've come through this with grace.
Well, this has been a really, really wonderful time with hearing about your story, Michelle, and the way the situations in your life led up to something that it's allowed you to get your story out and to a lot of people and to feel this support and the threads of your identity coming together. It's a really powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website page. It's michellegauvreau.com. And you can also get in touch with me via email at info@michellegauvreau.com. You can find me on Facebook under Michelle Rice-Gauvreau. I also have a page called I Am an Adoptee.
I want to thank you very much for your time and
Thank you.
experience. I'm sorry you had to lean up to get out of the sunlight, but I've
sorry.
I hope it doesn't put your neck out of alignment too bad.
No.
But
well, thank you everyone for being here and listening to my story. I hope I didn't make you snore.
It's been very compelling, and you've gone through a lot, and you've been a great example here.
I have been, but I also like to say that, I take every step, one step at a time, and every day, one day at a time.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Michelle, and thanks to everybody who's joined here. What we're going to do is conclude the recording section. So the Zoom call will continue. We'll go into Q&A, but this will go up on our Fireside Adoptees YouTube channel with our other interviews. And again, we're just grateful for your time and appreciate you being here, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.